Welcome to the Top Order podcast. It's This Week in Cricket time. First time in ages we've been doing a This Week in Cricket Hall of Fame. Last week our socials and our emails have lit up with criticism of that final two and Baldy's algorithm. We won't get into that on the show tonight though. We're going to talk current cricket. We've got white ball series going on. England versus the Black Caps. We're at the tail end of that T20 portion of the series and moving into the ODIs. We're also going to talk Australia, South Africa, Asia Cup, and then there's a little bit of New Zealand news in terms of their World Cup squad. I'm barely believe that Lippy can keep the grin off his face. Kane Williamson named in that provisional squad for New Zealand. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, we are This Week in Cricket for the first time in a little while. We've had lots and lots going on in terms of Ashes cricket. We've had a little bit of a hiatus, a little break of a week, 1 week off that Lippy's allowed us in the last 4 years. But we are going to talk, I suppose, the lead into this World Cup. It's all hotting up in terms of white ball cricket around the world, series galore. We can kind of barely keep up, I suppose, with these, you know, what are warm-ups, etc. But plenty of conjecture around squads, and we'll come on to, you know, the breaking New Zealand cricket news, which I'm sure when it came into our Top Order podcast inbox from New Zealand cricket, Lippy, you must have been refreshing that every 5 minutes over the last few weeks.
Can't believe it, mate.
But let's start with the series that's in play at the moment. So England, New Zealand, really one-sided in terms of the results so far. Two absolute shellackings that England have delivered to New Zealand, and then New Zealand delivering England a bit of their own medicine in the third game. What's caught, I guess, the Kiwi eye so far? We want to talk about Finale, and we probably want to talk about pace bowling as well. But yeah, what's caught your eye, boys?
That's the first note I have on here, is that, just nothing's been, those games just have not been close. I mean, I always sort of find it, like, we're talking about T20s, that the ODIs are to come. I think for New Zealand, the ODIs are what I'll be paying a lot closer attention to, because we've actually picked, we'll probably get onto it later, there's so many squads being named at the moment for New Zealand, all sorts of different combinations we just saw in the UAE, and now these ones in the UK. The England squad, I think, is the closest to a squad that actually might resemble somewhat what the World Cup squad looks like. So I think that's what's to come. These actual results I don't care too much about, but I do think for New Zealand, the Finn Allen question is the big one, because he's been dividing opinion, I will say. I mean, New Zealand cricket has invested a lot of time in him. We've clearly from maybe 2 years ago. Couldn't quite imagine the time, but basically since they said we're going to pick you over Martin Guptill's been out of the scene since then. It's been a case of, we are picking you, and all the way through with our white balls for the T20 World Cup, for the ODI World Cup. Is he delivering? I mean, this innings kind of showed us what he's capable of, but actually, is this what we're going to get in the World Cup is the big question we have to ask now.
So the question I've got on my sheet here is, what is acceptable for failure and success? And I kind of have looked at it from that perspective, and I think it's an interesting one, because that threshold changes based on winning or losing. If we're winning, it's less likely to get him dropped. If he's losing, I find it hard to pin a loss directly on him, if you know what I mean. There will be a time, I think, that you need to look at his average, his strike rate, his conversions, but I don't think that's now. I think it's more of a lucky dip for me. If he scores runs, we win. If he doesn't score runs, our 3, 4, 5, the engine room, I expect him to pick up the slack and put a score on the board. So I don't think it's a time to look at him. We'll put that kind of pressure on him. Let him just go.
But when does that time come? I mean, I have various thoughts about the way he's been going. But I guess when does that time come? And I think if we talk about the World Cup, you talk about success or failure. He, to me, is I guess the one-day game, I think, is changing a little bit. Now that it's only 10 overs and for the power play, and then you've got the only 4 players out. A lot that's been made of the T20 form that Finn Allen has is that, he's only made it out of that power play, I think, 4 times. Like, it was 3, then he made it out now so it's 4 times in his career. if we look to the white ball stuff, I think, potentially his role I see in the World Cup is more like what McCullum did in that 2015 World Cup, and more on what we've mentioned a couple of times about T20 cricket, that he needs to play kind of match-winning innings, and if he kicks off, like you say, he can win us a game, and I think that is crucial. But it sort of gets to the point where if he's failing 80% of the time, does that actually put us on the back foot too much in those games? I actually don't know the answer to this question.
It's a really strange situation, I think, coming into a white ball world tournament, and even with the best run now in terms of the games that are available, he's only going to have played just over 20 one-day internationals leading into a 50-over World Cup. We spoke a little bit couple of podcasts ago maybe around Harry Brook, who's actually in a worse situation in terms of games played, and everyone's clamouring for his talent to be the factor that gets him into that squad. I'm sure we might talk about that a little bit later on. So I see this Finn Allen conundrum for you guys as pretty similar to that, in that I think you need a little bit more time. Clearly, there's a lot more time in the ODI game than there is in the T20 game. So really knowing his role and knowing the situations that he might be in is, I think, going to be really, really important. It is whether or not they're taking a little bit of the, Zach Crawley approach, and just saying, we believe that you might come off sufficiently enough to impact enough games that then becomes into a tournament winning set of performances, but it's a hell of a risk in a tournament as well, with this format as well, where it is a pretty decent length tournament, isn't it?
The other thing that you probably look at is who's going to replace him if you drop him. I mean, we've seen Finn Allen in the domestic competition. He's head and shoulders above everybody at the top of the innings, so that's another thing for me.
I guess the question, before I answer your question, is around, do you think I'm right that the role for him is that McCullum role? That, I sort of thought McCullum did a great job in that 2015 World Cup. What were his actual numbers? So I went back and looked. So he scored 65 off 49 in the first game, then he scored 15, then he scored 77 off 25 balls, that's that England game, then scored 50 off 24, 42 off 19, 8, 12, 59 off 26, and then 0. So he's actually, all the games that he's come off at an extraordinary rate and put us way ahead of the game.
50% success rate, isn't it?
Yeah. And he performed incredibly well. Like you said, it's actually over 50%. Do you think that that's the role we want to play? Because when actually, if we look at Finn Allen's innings, this innings that he's done well in, this 80 odd that he's got against England, he was 20 off 20 balls. And he actually, the thing is that he runs and he plays with the risk. Sometimes you see players that score quickly, but they seem to be able to do it. Mitch Marsh, we might talk about him a bit later. Sometimes when he's going well, he's scoring quickly, but he doesn't seem to be taking huge risks. He's kind of flicking the ball off his legs for six.
Conway as well, to an extent, doesn't seem to take too much risk and scores at a decent lick. Let's skip the fast bowlers, and maybe there's an answer in this in terms of whether or not Kane Williamson's fit, because that really changes the dynamic of the side, doesn't it? If you've got a player like Williamson in there that's very, very sticky, I suppose you would say, does that then give you the ability to play someone that might be a little bit of a luxury? Is it going to come down to the matchups and the permutations that you've got in and around that squad?
Well, I think that answers Raj's question as well, because who to replace him. You're really looking at, if you're not going to go with Finn, you're probably going with either Will Young, who's probably been the one who, I think when we talk about Kane, we might end up talking about whether Will Young will actually make the squad now that Kane's been confirmed. But you're probably thinking Will Young, or you're thinking one of those middle order guys, probably Daryl Mitchell, goes up to the top of the order. And I think they do play quite different roles than what Finn is. Daryl Mitchell seems to score quickly anyway, and he's sort of probably another one of those players that just seems to be able to score quickly without necessarily taking risks constantly. But I don't like that approach, and I think if they were going to go away from Finn Allen, they would be doing sort of what they did in the 2019 World Cup, where they went, okay, Colin Munro, it's not coming off for you, we're going to replace you with Henry Nicholls, who's a much different kind of player.
And to answer your question around the role, I don't think that we should pigeonhole him as a McCullum type player. We've already seen in his short career in the one-day stuff. He actually changes how he plays completely.
I agree.
To how he plays in the 2020 stuff. I think, we shouldn't pin it on that. I mean, what are we looking at here? 75 balls for 100? Like, that's slow these days. And I think he could do that as well within his skills to do that.
I think if Finn Allen is going to be successful in the World Cup, he has to treat his innings like he can be 20 off 20. He doesn't need to be 45 off 20. I think the innings that I've seen him play really, really well. I remember one where he got runs and he didn't score quickly. He actually nudged the ball around a little bit and just hit the bad ball. He's going to get enough balls in his zone that he doesn't have to manufacture shots in the World Cup. Yes, it's going to be maybe a little bit lower and slower than he's used to, and he needs to adjust his game a fraction. But if he takes undue risk, he's not going to come off 50% of the time. He's going to come off once, maybe twice in the tournament, and that's not enough for New Zealand, because if New Zealand are going to make a final, he needs to come off in one of those knockout games. He needs to come off in a semi-final like McCullum does, but he doesn't need to be 60 off 20. He needs to be 60 off 45, and Conway's going around him and Kane's going around him, and New Zealand are 1 for 90, 1 for 100, rather than 20 for 1 off 3 overs, which is the alternative. And I don't think that sets you guys up for a tremendous amount of success, because your middle order is very strong and they can capitalise on a good start. But if you're 20 for 3, then it becomes a lot harder for Mitchell to dig you out of the poo.
Without making this a 97-minute segment, let's talk about the rotation that is clearly evident in the squads that New Zealand have picked coming up for this Bangladesh stint as well. And then we've got the Kane question as well. I mean, my 2 cents, right decision to get him in the squad if they think he might be a chance, because they can always replace him. More risky to have him there as someone that they think they might bring in if someone else gets injured, and then you've got you've got a little bit of a conundrum there. But have you got any concerns that you don't know your best 15 or 16?
I don't know. I mean, I think the fact that they're naming, so they've named Kane Williamson today. They've said that they've signalled that he's going to be in the squad. We're recording this on Tuesday, the 5th or whatever it is. They're saying that they're going to name the squad on Monday, the 11th, New Zealand time. So they've already got that squad penciled in. If you ask me, that they already know what those sides are. And I think more the rotation, and even when I look at my squad on paper, I think the top 11 is very clear to me. It's the 4 reserves that I don't quite know how they all fit in. And I think probably your balance question, I might throw it to Raj here, because I don't know. I mean, I think in New Zealand terms, we've talked many times about how we play with very consistent, like we've praised New Zealand for having a very consistent lineup. This last month or so, and even in this lead up to this World Cup, so what you're referencing is this Bangladesh series, where pretty much half the top squad, Kane's not going to be there, and then Conway, Latham, a whole bunch of other guys are not going to be in the squad to Bangladesh, which is 3 ODIs, I think, about 10 days out before the World Cup, and so it's basically filled with second team players. Is this disruptive? It seems to be deviating from a style that's worked for us, if it's not disruptive at all. I don't know.
Didn't we do something similar before the 2020 World Cup? I think we went to India, maybe it was Bangladesh as well.
Yeah.
And we took a team that wasn't selected for the World Cup. So if we look at that, then that's great. But in saying that, I don't like seeing it. I think it is disruptive. I'd rather see them go and play 1 or 2 games on tour. I'd rather see that with that full squad that we want to be taking to the World Cup. From a who's not making it perspective with Kane now around, what do you think about who are the candidates to miss out?
I mean, I will just say it's got nothing to do with Kane. If I were the selectors, I'd be having a much more serious conversation than I think is happening around Lockie and Adam Milne. I think personally there's probably only room for one of them, and if my eyes and the stats tell me that Adam Milne is bowling better than Lockie Ferguson at the moment. I think he's bowled better for New Zealand, and he bowled better in the 100. He's bowled better in all of the franchise tournaments that he's played in recent times. I think the stats back it up, and whether Adam Milne can bowl 10 overs consistently and make it through a World Cup, I think that's been a big challenge for him. Fitness has been a big challenge, whereas Lockie, he's had his injury troubles, but he's generally been able to be quite useful in those tournaments. He obviously made it in the 2019 World Cup and was a key player for us at that time. But I guess that's the first question I have about squad building.
So just going on from that question, Baldy, I know you've put a little squad down there on paper. Do you see Ferguson and Milne playing in the same 11?
I can't see, if you can only take 15 to the World Cup, I can't see New Zealand taking 2 spare seamers. I can see room for Henry, Southey and Bolt in the first 11.
Yeah, and I think they are the 3. When I think about it, Southey, as much as people might think that he's fallen off in the white ball format, I actually think his variations and things on Indian pitches will be very valuable, and I think he'll be locked in.
And he can bowl in 3 phases of the game as well, which I don't necessarily think you can say about about your speedsters.
So that being the case, you can only take 4 backup players effectively, and I don't think, given that the tournament is in India, that you could take both Lockie Ferguson and Adam Milne. So I think it's got to be one of the 2. Australia are facing a very similar question.
Is Milne going to Bangladesh?
Yes. Lockie is the captain,
and that's where it comes
the interesting
from a
conundrum for me, right?
Mixed messages perspective. How could they name him captain
I think
and then not take him to the?
I think he'll be there. I just, like I said, I think that if I was selecting the squad, it would be a very, very serious conversation about whether Adam Milne is actually bowling better than him.
All other things being equal, Lockie Ferguson's extra pace is a point of difference for New Zealand. I mean, the seamers that you've got are very, very skilled. Matt Henry has had an excellent last 24, 36 months with the ball, with the white ball in particular. But if you have Henry, Southey and Bolt, Lockie Ferguson provides a little bit of a point of difference in your attack if there are conditions that can be exploited by genuine pace. And we've seen him when he's on song here 2 years ago against Bangladesh. It's a very, very different game when Lockie Ferguson's bowling 150 k's an hour and straight.
Similar to, for me, for your Finn Allen question, I see Lockie as being a guy that has probably more chance of that match-winning performance. His strike rate is significantly lower. You're not taking him to contain, because every time I've seen him bowl in the last 2 years, he has gone air miles, but he picks you up a wicket because he's got that, as Baldy said, that that little bit of an X factor that I would much rather be facing up to Adam Milne than Lockie Ferguson in that first game.
I'd rather be facing Ish Sodhi, but
I think he'll be there. I think he'll be there. But yeah, I guess to answer the rest of your question, the more that I keep thinking about this, I think Rachin is almost locked in the squad, because we have to have another spinner, right?
Is that because Bracewell is not there?
Yeah.
Sorry, okay.
I think so. I just don't see how if they think that Ish and Mitchell Santner are in their top 11 non-stop, for every game, I think they have to have a backup for them.
Yep, I would agree.
And so I think Rachin is in. I'm fascinated to see who you've got for the next 2 spots, Baldy, because I think that's where it gets really, really tough.
Well, so I think it depends on how many bowlers you take in. So if you take Santner at 7 and then 4 bowlers, then you've got, assuming Kane plays and Finn Allen plays, then your sort of first 11 is locked in.
Yep.
And Will Young, Glenn Phillips and Chapman are all fighting for spots.
Phillips, come on, no. Phillips is in the 11, absolutely locked.
So where does Glenn Phillips bat?
Well, he's
anywhere in the side.
He's at 6. Well, then Neesham is the man that you.
Neesham is the man
out of that.
Okay.
I actually have a bit of a bone to pick. I have written it down here in this current series that we're talking about. I know it's been the 2020s. Glenn Phillips has been batting at 5 and 4 in this team. I find that very, very strange. It's an absolute waste, and he looks in incredible form.
He looks looking good.
Okay, so who's your extra bowling option then if Jimmy Neesham doesn't play? So you've got 5 bowlers.
Phillips will have to be that. So you've got Phillips and Mitchell are your 6th and 7th bowlers.
Right.
That's the thing. You're picking 5 specialist bowlers and you're expecting them to do the job.
Right.
I think your other option really is to try and pick Neesham or pick another all-rounder and then try and cobble together 10 overs out of the 3 of them and only have 4 specialists. But I don't think that they will do that. And I think that's what puts Neesham, Chapman and Will Young really fighting for 2 spots. And
Yes, I would agree now.
And
Yep.
you know, I had Ravindra in that sort of mix. I didn't, you know, like if you just look at the pure skill and what they've done for New Zealand and all of that kind of stuff, I think probably the 3 that we just mentioned are above Ravindra in terms of what they could offer to a New Zealand side. But I think because of where it's played, balance of the squad, you know, in a week's time I could look very silly here, but I just think that they have to kind of take Rachin because they've invested him being that Michael Bracewell, Mitchell Santner kind of replacement.
Any other business on New Zealand? The World Cup now starts in about 15 minutes time after this segment. But anything else you want to talk about from a New Zealand perspective as we lead in?
Nothing from me on New Zealand. I think we've covered the ground. I think I am interested to get your thoughts on England though. And I mean, you mentioned Harry Brook before and the clamouring that's happening for Harry Brook to be in the squad. I mean, you know, like we said up front, T20s, what do they actually mean? And, you know, what are these games actually, do they have any bearing on World Cup squads? Has it changed your opinion at all about should he be there? Because I think a lot of people said at the start, Harry Brook should be there. And you were sort of more in the camp that actually some of these other guys have done the job for us and I'm okay leaving Harry out.
Yeah, I think it was less about I was okay leaving him out. It was more around I guess the fairness in terms of the way that they've selected that ODI squad and who might miss out. I think as I sort of, you know, think about it now, and when I probably formulated some of those opinions, I'd not heard what the selectors had said, and Luke Wright saw an interview with him shortly after probably the last time we spoke about this, and he actually alluded to the fact that it was, you know, once Stokes was going to be in the squad, it was almost like that was the decision they had to make. I don't personally agree with that as the permutation that should be the question mark. For me, I would rather have Butler and Bairstow, Bairstow and Milan, Bairstow and Stokes, than Jason Roy opening that batting if it gives the ability to get Brook into the squad. I think David Milan has had a fantastic record over the past 18 months or so in the 50 over stuff, not to mention the fact I think he's probably still ranked in the top 20 batters in T20 cricket, if not a little bit higher. So for me, the question mark is really around Jason Roy's form, and then the other person is Liam Livingstone. But he offers that bowling option. So it's, you know, and it's really, so that's really, really difficult. And then the only other option that they would have is for me to leave a bowler out. You know, they've got Sam Curran, David Willey, and Reece Topley, 3 left arm seamers of similar-ish pace, different skills, absolutely different skills. Curran is nailed on for me. So my question mark would be, you know, could you leave out, and you know, be pretty harsh on David Willey. It'd be the second 50 over World Cup in a row. He's missed out when he's probably played a lot of the lead up. He was, you know, famously dropped when Jofra Archer was available for that tournament. So, and I think that, you know, that's the question I'd be asking, but it isn't the question the England selectors are asking. Going to be very, very interesting if he gets another couple of scores. You know, are they going to listen to the Daily Mail and the Sun, or are they going to listen to the plans that they'd formulated before leading into this series?
And I know other people want to talk about different series, but Gus Atkinson, a word on him, because I think he's looked great. You know, I didn't watch a lot of the 100, but he's impressed me in these couple of games that he's played. Yeah,
and look, I guess has come onto the scene at a really good time for England. Archer, obviously, whilst he's, I believe, travelling with the side as a reserve, he's probably not. He's probably similar in terms of his chances of playing a part as Kane, isn't he, really? So I think Atkinson, he is your depth chart for a Mark Wood, particularly with Ollie Stone injured. So I think I think he'll be on the plane, whether he's in the 15 or whether he's one of those reserves. And again, he might leapfrog one of those left arm options, because I think you've got to get him in the side with what he offers, which is, you know, a speed gun approaching 92, 93 mile an hour. So yeah, look, he's burst onto the scene pretty well. We've got the speed guns turned up because it's a home series, but yeah, look, I've been very, very impressed with him.
Just on Archer, is it his elbow still, or is this a different injury?
Yeah, look, I believe it is still the elbow and the kind of rehab around that. And look, I guess getting...
Is that a bit of a concern? Like, it's dragging on?
I don't know. You boys are the bloody physios, so I don't know. Has anyone seen him from 500 or 600 metres?
I haven't been that close, but it would be concerning to me if he's not bowling regularly, right? He hasn't bowled in a long time. He bowled a little bit in the IPL and was injured again.
The social media of him off the long run in the nets, right. How quick, I don't know.
97, 98 if the home speed guns are on him.
Well, yeah, but I guarantee one thing, you wouldn't fancy being the bat down the other end.
No, I'd prefer to face Rashid, Ali, Rehan Ahmed, et al. Maybe a bit of Milan.
Joe Root.
Yeah, Milan bowls good leggies, actually. Yeah.
I like his ball.
Well, let's move on and open up the Baldwin microphone. So, again, coming live to our Australian correspondent. We've got some cricket going on, Australia versus South Africa. What have we learned so far? We've got some ball signing and tampering in the crowd, I believe. And I've got a note here. Are South Africa foxing? I don't know whether that's a typo.
Was me.
Okay, what does that mean?
What's the context to that
Well, South Africa have been pumped in all three of those T20s. I mean, one day is to come, but South Africa got towed up in those T20s.
And Aiden Markram's opening the bowling.
Well, yes.
And Temba Bavuma, who can't get a gig in his own franchise tournaments, playing.
Well, all of these things are South Africa foxing everybody and going for the Australia prior to the T20 World Cup that we won route to lose everything in the warm-ups. And then
this is another Australia is winning. I have to play down our chances.
Oh, Australia played some great cricket. Australia played some fantastic cricket and have given the selectors a bit of a David Warner headache because Matthew Short I thought was excellent in that series, and he's traditionally been a T20 player, but he's a very, very good white ball player. He's done a great job over the last several years in the domestic scene in Australia, leading run scorer last year. He's given Australia a lot of headaches, and I think he's closer now to penciling himself into that reserve batter spot for Australia because
he did score some runs.
Other batters in that side could shift down the order and whatnot. I think he had a couple of scores, but I thought he looked
and a
good.
duck as well.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. Everyone.
But you're asking, are they foxing? It looks like they're close to their full squad. That's their African
No, they're
side.
missing a few. They're missing Rabada, Miller, Klaassen, Quinton de Kock. Yeah.
Cool. That's Quinton de Kock and play.
Well, yeah, I guess that's another question. But I think they're missing a lot of batting firepower. Rabada's the only one that really they're missing from the bowling, and you could argue that he hasn't been that great in the past 12 months.
Yeah, since we praised him on the Top Order Hall of Fame, he hasn't been fantastic. So that's probably on me.
But I do think they're missing a decent amount of batting. But you're right that they've been smashed, and I think that the decision that South Africa has made around what they want to prioritise, I do think that not in a weird way, in a very important way, now makes these ODI and T20 World Cups
hugely important,
very significant for them, because if obviously they're doing the T20s tournament, they're prioritising their franchise tournament, one, because they have to make money.
Yep.
But also, I think if that's what you're doing with your game, you need to make sure you actually perform at these tournaments. So they're going to have to lift their game from what they've been showing in this.
They've got a lot of big names in South African cricket that they're potentially going to take to that World Cup, but I haven't seen them come together in any way, shape or form in this series. There have been one or two individual performances over the course of the first three T20s, but they haven't played like a team, and their fielding standards have dropped. I mean, Temba Bavuma is normally a very, very good field, and he dropped some pretty easy, straightforward international chances that gave Australians a couple of lives, and you can't give a player like Mitch Marsh or anyone multiple chances to make runs, otherwise they'll punish you.
Go on, tell us about Australia.
They're very
good. They're going.
They're going good.
And your man Mitch Marsh.
They're going good.
Where's he going to bat in the ODIs for Australia? 3.
He bats at 3. Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was talk of him opening the batting. I really like him at 3 and Steve Smith at 4 because Marsh can bat with absolute freedom, knowing that if he doesn't come off, Steve Smith can kind of nudge it around and play a bit of a Joe Root, Kane Williamson role and kind of hold that middle order together. Because if you have a look at the way Australia are set up, if they play what I think is their preferred sort of first 11, behind Smith are going to be players who are explosive. There'll be Maxwell, potentially a Green or a Stoinis or a Hardy, and then you've kind of got Carey and the bowlers after that. So, Smith becomes a very, very important cog in that middle order for Australia, but it's Warner or Short, Head and Marsh in the top three that need to get Australia off to a bit of a flyer in that first 15 or 20 overs, and then we build a little bit more traditionally through the middle, I think, with Smith, rather than having a look at some of the England sides or the New Zealand side even that can kind of explode from anywhere in the order. So the only concern... Sorry, go ahead, Raj.
I was going to say, this ODI series coming up, sorry to cut over you, is it important for anyone more so than David Warner?
Well,
Do you think if he has 3 failures...
I think if he has 3 failures, Australia have to look at whether or not we pick Matthew Short, particularly if Matthew Short has some success. The other challenge that we've got is if you have a look at that top 6 or top 7, there's no wicketkeeper bat in there. There's no Joss Butler. There's no Tom Latham. There's no Ishan Kishan. It's Alex Carey at 7, who's a tremendous gloveman and a very steady player. And he has made runs for Australia in the past, but he's not that same calibre of explosive Butler, Bairstow, Gilchrist type of player who can bat in the top 3 or 4 for Australia and wear the gloves. So we are carrying an extra player at number 7 in Alex Carey. So the question for me is, can Josh Inglis force his way into that side with some tremendous batting over the next 3 or 4 weeks? I don't think Australia will pick Josh Philippe. I don't think they'll go to anyone else. It's Inglis or Carey. But I don't think we can afford to carry 2, because we've just got too many other players that we need to cover in that squad to be able to pick both Inglis and Carey. So I think one of them will travel as a reserve for the other and will only come in through injury.
When we talked previously about the Aussie squad, we talked a bit about the all-rounders, and you seemed a little bit concerned about, making up the extra overs and all of that kind of stuff. Is Stoinis' bowling given you a bit more confidence in this? Because I think he's been excellent in this. I mean, again, tweet these T20 games, things can happen, very differently in a short format game. But he's bowled up front, he's bowled at the death, he's bowled in different situations, and actually equipped himself pretty well.
Yeah, he gives us a great option. And if you have a look at the way that Australia's set up, Maxwell becomes a real question mark for me, because he's still getting over that leg injury. He had ankle soreness when he got to South Africa, so he's going to have to be managed through the India series. He won't play all of those games, so he becomes a real question mark for me, because he could bat at 5 or 6 for Australia, bowl some overs, bowl some spin in India, and give us a little bit more flexibility. But you've got Marsh potentially, you've got Green, and then you've got Stoinis to fit between 2 spots, I think, in that Australian order. Maybe even only 1 spot if you have to take Ashton Agar in at 7 to give yourself 5 genuine bowlers. He himself has got a calf complaint, so there's some injury concerns with Australia. I still don't think we've got the ideal setup to go to that World Cup in India, because if you play 2 spinners, Agar bats 1 too high, or you have to leave out one of Stark, Cummins, Hazelwood to also get Zampa in the squad, for whom I think he's a lock. Zampa, I think he has to play every game.
Yes.
So just on the spinners there, the depth chart, we've seen Sanger come out and bowl really well in this tournament. What does that look like to you? What does it look like from a playing in the subcontinent perspective, especially if Agar is injured? Could you guys play 2 spinners?
Well, the challenge, I think, if you have a look at Sangar's first-class record, he doesn't have a great batting record. I haven't seen him bat a lot, but if you have a look at his average, I don't think he averages above 10 or 11 in any of the formats. So if that is true, and he is a genuine number 11, and I haven't seen enough of his batting to make a determination either way, you're carrying potentially Hazelwood, Zampa, and Tanveer Sangha as your 9, 10, 11. Now, I don't want to borrow words out of English cricketers' mouths, but there is a bit of a semblance of they're not great finishers in the one-day game. So that would be the concern.
It's going to be New Zealand's going to be in the exact same position. We just named the side before, and it's Ish Sodhi coming in at 8. I mean, he's improved his batting a lot. I give him a lot of credit, but we got Sodhi, Henry, Southee.
Different in the T20s than it is in a 50-over game, where you might come in and you're 140 for 6.
But that will be our ODI lineup as well. So I think Australia's not unique in that, and I think I don't know. My main concern when I think about these kind of things is you actually just have to trust your batters, and if your batters aren't going to do the job, then having Ashton Agar over Tanveer Sangha doesn't win you those games, doesn't change anything.
Spoken like a true bowler there, trust your batters, and then whinge in the dressing room afterwards if they don't get enough runs on the board.
Go and put the heroes on after 20 overs and sit there sulking.
Heroes when they get 27 not out.
Exactly.
Can I just say also, sorry, so if Agar isn't available... Is
that your top score, Lip, 27 not out?
Yeah, it's more than that.
How many Prem 50s have you got up here?
In Auckland? 0.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So then, if he is injured, Agar, not able to play a big part in the World Cup, doesn't that actually put Australia in a little bit of balance issue there?
Yes.
Who's going to bowl spin?
Well, it means that Zampa and Sangha would have to play if they were going to play two spinners, and you would probably then have to only pick two seamers because I think you need a little bit more batting. You can't have Cummins, I think, at 7. I think that's one spot too high. I don't think you can have Stark at 7. That's one spot too high. So you could only pick two of Cummins, Stark and Hazelwood if you were going to pick Sangha and Zampa, which means that your all-rounders, Maxwell, Marsh and Stoinis/Green, would have to bowl then 10 overs between them. Whereas if they had maybe Agar at 7 and then pushed everyone up, you've still got to squeeze one of those all-rounders out, but you don't have to have overs out of Maxwell and Marsh. You can get 2-3 overs here and there and burgle a couple, which I think will be the way that Australia will have to go if they bat Ashton Agar at 8, which to me is a huge risk, because then Carey has to bat in the top 6, and again I think they're one too high. All of those guys are one too high. No disrespect to them because they're all great international players, but you know what I mean.
Let's move on and talk Asia Cup cricket. So we've talked a hell of a lot of T20. India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka playing a 12-game 50-over tournament as a warm-up for the World Cup. Now there's a novel concept.
That's fantastic.
What's caught our eye so far in that tournament? Interesting. You mentioned the Pakistan bowling attack a little bit earlier on. Rohit Sharma out in the press, saying how do you prepare to play against that Pakistan bowling attack, which looks pretty decent, doesn't it?
It does. The first thing I want to say about this one is I feel sorry for Nepal. In the same pool as India and Pakistan. Yeah. Literally, it really is a pool of death there for them. But yeah, that Pakistan bowling attack is incredible. We've been saying it for a while.
I know.
That Pakistan bowling attack is very hard to play. I'd be very surprised to see any final apart from an India-Pakistan final going forward. Does anyone else have any?
In the Asia Cup or the World Cup?
The Asia Cup.
Yeah, fair enough.
No, I think you're right in that, if you Sri Lanka obviously won it last year, but Sri Lanka missing a couple of key players in this actual tournament, obviously trying to get themselves fit for the World Cup that follows very, very quickly after. But yeah, I mean, that Pakistan side, like Shaheen Shah Afridi, Haris Rauf, Nazim Shah, I mean, I don't know, people don't need to hear us talk for too long on that, because if anyone needs a reminder about how good they are, then they probably haven't been watching cricket for the past 18 months.
Babar Azam at the other end scoring hundreds for fun.
Yeah. On the India side that you mentioned before, Ishan Kishan, I mean, by the time this comes out, they would have played Nepal, but at the moment he's now scored 4 ODI 50s in a row. Obviously sort of got them back in the game against Pakistan before the rain came. He's got to be locked into that Indian keeping spot now and probably batting 6. I think that's a huge win for them in terms of there were probably a lot of questions, 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, about who's going to kind of fill that spot. And they still do seem to have some questions about who are going to fill a couple of other spots, whether Shreyas Iyer is going to slot in, whether KL Rahul is going to come in somewhere, whether Shubman Gill, his kind of form's fluctuating up and down. But I think it must be huge for them to have Ishan Kishan now kind of locked in.
And I think that he's actually benefited a little bit from having too much talent, because KL Rahul is probably the one that he was fighting against for the gloves, and I just think that with Shubman Gill and that top 3 that they've got, you can't fit KL Rahul in there. So he's the beneficiary of it, Kishan there. But is he just warm? People are saying he's just warm in the gloves for someone like Rishabh Pant when he's back to full fitness, but he has been billed as a real talent. I mean, you saw that Mumbai Indians documentary back in the day, and they really built him up, and he's, hopefully starting to deliver. That's what it looks like anyway.
Yeah, and look, I guess it's the embarrassment of the riches that Indian setup's got, that he probably has had to wait a little bit of time for his chance with Rishabh Pant around. KL Rahul had the gloves for a little while, although he was in short sleeves, so that was never going to work. So yeah, I think fantastic that he's got that opportunity, and he's got a World Cup to nail that spot down. And it's a serious injury that Rishabh Pant sustained. So who knows whether he comes back as strong as he was before he went off.
Before we kind of round out the Asia Cup conversation, I mean, it's obviously only just started. We'll see what happens, and there'll be probably a number of other storylines that we might touch on next week. But in terms of those other sides that we talked about, India, Pakistan, we all expect them to be big players in this World Cup. Do we think that the Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, do we think that they have much of a chance to be maybe banana skins or even better than banana skins in this actual World Cup that we're thinking about? Because, quite often we talk about, okay, in the subcontinent conditions, those sides are very challenging to play against. But still, when you see, sides that are going to be expected to make the semi-finals, you don't often see any of their names anywhere near in any of those conversations.
I think the thing for me, so I think Pakistan aside, who have actually, if you think about it, not many of their players get to play, obviously IPL for obvious reasons. So they're not getting the opportunity to play too often in Indian conditions. But then there's probably an underrepresentation now of Sri Lankan players and Bangladeshi players in a lot of those franchise tournaments. So to answer your question around banana skin, yes, they're potential banana skins and might impact whether or not I think one of the 5 or 6 teams that you'd expect to get into the the latter stages of the tournaments, whether they do, whether any of them have got the firepower, the artillery to get deep in the tournament and actually cause an upset by winning it. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I don't think. I would be having Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan. I'd be putting them firmly in. They're not going to get to the final stages of the tournament. And if one of them makes the semi-final, then think of a suitable forfeit.
Anyone else have any differing views on that?
No, I think the biggest issue is consistency, right? It's a 50-over World Cup. It's not a 2021. You've got to play well for sustained periods of times over 9 games through the round robin.
Yeah.
I think it will sort out the cream will rise to the top. In saying that, I do think that Sri Lanka, particularly out of those ones that you talked about, if they can get the full side that they've got on the park, they have the potential. But subcontinent conditions aren't the barrier that they used to be, especially for the top players.
I think that Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan are going to cost one of the favourites a spot in the semi-finals, because I think they're good enough that they're going to win games in those conditions. And if you have a look at the closeness of... Look, we'll get on to it. I think there are 3 teams that are above the rest at the moment from an ODI cricket perspective, at least on paper.
Australia won't be in this list.
They've left Australia out.
Then there are three sides all fighting for one spot, I think, in the semi-finals, and I think that there could be some the team that gets one of those 3 sides that I'm thinking of. If they lose to a Sri Lanka or a Bangladesh, that could be the difference between being 6-3 and in the semi-finals and 5-4 and missing out and finishing 5th.
You're going to let the listeners and
not until we get to the preview. No, we wait to the preview show. We wait to the preview show.
Bit of drama for the listeners.
Post in the comments down below what you think Baldy's 3 locks are,
Bubble sides,
and think who's in that group of 3 that might just make it anyway.
Yeah.
Should we finish off the podcast with a bit more New Zealand news? So we've got the Big Bash draft has happened. A couple of left arm seamers there that we might want to talk about.
I did just think it was worth kind of noting, maybe again with kind of spidey senses on all of the Kane stuff that came out. Trent Boult was not in the BBL auction and obviously was in it last year, and I think... I can't decide whether that means he's not in that because he's in the World Cup and then obviously is going to be in the Mumbai sides that go and play in the other competitions, the Dubai 20, whatever it is, and in the South Africa T20, or if it means maybe he's going to play some of the rest of this home summer for New Zealand. Very wishful thinking there.
Can I ask? So if you're not in the draft, can you still get picked up? Because a lot of them obviously didn't make picks in the draft.
Yes.
They're on a list somewhere, don't they?
So I think you can pick your preferred player by signing them to a contract after the draft, but you have to kind of punt that nobody else picks them up in the draft. And interestingly, a lot of the BBL sides passed in rounds 2 and rounds 3, and consequently Rehan Ahmed got picked up, which I think is an absolute steal. But there are, you can sign your preferred player to a contract.
Because I think that, Bolt not being there, but also Rizwan pulling out and Puran pulling out, because they may not be able to play full BBL seasons because it goes for 200 matches now.
It does. And clashes with the South Africa tournament, so that is one of the considerations for some of those BBL sides. Not all of them. Some of them have picked up BBL players who will only be available for the first half of the tournament.
I'd really love to see Rizwan in the BBL.
That would be so much fun.
The other one that you've probably got on your list there is that Corey Anderson, fresh off his Major League Cricket, success, I guess, has actually, he was banging sixes, hit Rabada for 3 sixes in a row, and that showed what he can do, and he's been picked up by, I think it's Hobart. So, yeah, very, very exciting to see him kind of back in the mix.
Maybe he's going to babysit Tim Payne's kids.
Maybe. That seems to be how you kind of get yourself going in international tournaments in Australia.
Send him a text.
We've got a New Zealand cricket CEO, so that appointment has been made. Lippy, you've got the details, no doubt.
Yeah, Scott Wienick's been announced as the CEO. I think probably... I
heard you had something to do with that, didn't you say?
Nothing to do with it. It may be a very distant relation, but nothing that I can contribute on that conversation. Never actually met him personally, but I think probably... I think what that suggests, and the first sort of things that I've heard him say, is that probably it's going to be pretty much status quo. I did really enjoy the fact that I think the ACC guys, the alternative cricket commentary guys, interviewed him, and one of the things that they did talk about is that balance between contracting and trying to make sure that the New Zealand players are very flexible with that contracting and being able to go off and earn their money and still be able to represent New Zealand, and trying to get that balance right, which is something we've talked about quite a bit in the last 6 months with Bolton, de Grandhomme and all these other players that are going off and doing that, because New Zealand just does not have the money to give out those central contracts that can compete with those leagues. So I think that being the first thing that he kind of says in one of the big interviews, I think that's a positive sign from my point of view.
And the other interesting thing I liked, which he said, was if it was up to him, every series would include 5 tests.
Oh, beautiful.
From New Zealand. But there's a fiduciary responsibility there. But look, we might get some more tests out of it, or some longer series out of it. I'm sick of these 2-test series. So that's a good sign as well. He's a bit old school. Like it.
Yeah, very good.
And let's finish the podcast on some red ball cricket, which is a rarity, I guess, and it's going to be a rarity for a period of time. Your home state is hosting an A-Series border, New Zealand, Australia, with Black Caps with the bragging rights from the first unofficial test in Brisbane. Second one underway at the moment. But Lippy, anything you want to pull out of that first test victory, unofficial test match?
Just a very good result for New Zealand, I think. If you actually look at, the lineups, there was a lot of quality players in the Australian side, a lot of sort of fringe players for New Zealand, but also a lot of players that hadn't had a lot of opportunity, some quite young domestic players for New Zealand, because as we've talked about, there are plenty of players, like the Dean Foxcroft, Dean Foxcroft and Addy Ashok, who were overplaying for New Zealand, kind of flew back in to play this New Zealand A game, and then I think Dean Foxcroft's off to Bangladesh. So a bit of travelling for them. But yeah, I think just a very, very impressive result. New Zealand cricket fan favourite Scott Kugelheim kind of absolutely delivered, came through, scored 100, got 9 wickets in that first game. Tom Bruce got some runs. We've seen probably the one I actually want to pinpoint is Sean Solia, who's actually scored a 90 odd in that second innings of that first game, took 5 wickets. Someone I have been wondering about whether he's someone that they look at for maybe a Colin de Grandhomme kind of role in the test game, where he can come in and bowl some overs and bat lower down in the order than he actually does for Auckland and things. So yeah, interesting. I mean, from my point of view, it's just interesting to see how those guys step up the next level. It's very important, I think, that A cricket, and kind of just to see how that group of players then goes in the home summer and the domestic stuff.
The Kugelheim one is an interesting one, because he's another one of those guys that's sort of head and shoulders above when you look at the domestic game, but hasn't made that leap yet into the sort of, full-time international arena. It's good to see him scoring some runs and taking wickets. Where do you see him in the setup for New Zealand at the moment? How far away is he?
Well, I thought he was miles away when he got selected, and then actually did an okay job when he played. So, I don't know. I still think he's quite far down the pecking order, if you ask me. But New Zealand cricket obviously sees something in him. They see that pace. They see the fact that he can come in and swing the willow. And actually, that's what he did in that game. New Zealand got rolled for 140th, I think, in that first innings of the first game. And it looked like, curtains really for them when Australia then bats, gets a 100-run lead. But Kuggeleijn comes in, changes that game, and then takes wickets in both innings to contribute. So, look, if you put the scores on the board, I think, your point about him being head and shoulders, I think that's the thing for me. In the past, but previous to this time that he's been selected for New Zealand, I don't think his numbers have stacked up at all in first-class cricket. Yes, he's had the talent and yes, he's had the ability there, but his numbers have not been good. And I think there's been times where he's been left out of the ND side. Obviously, there's all the off-field stuff that's gone on around him as well, which doesn't help, all that noise. But, yeah, I think, for him to be considered a serious contender for New Zealand, he's probably got to put a really consistent season together for ND, because actually, like we've talked about, you've still got Wagner, you've still got Henry, you've still got Southey. We're hoping that you're hoping that we might see Bolt. We're hoping that, one day we might see a Lockie Ferguson or someone else get in the mix. We're hoping that Kyle Jamieson is now going to be fit for an extended period of time. Blair Tickner, he's come in. A lot of people don't like what he's been able to do, but again, he's come in, put some okay performances on the board. So there are a lot of names in and around that, and Kugelein's going to have to push himself above that and show that he is actually worthy of a spot.
Fantastic. Well, boys, we will be back next week. We've got that one-day international series starts on Friday. We've still got one T20 to go, a bizarre scenario of 2 full-match series. That's the Future Tours programme or whatever it's called for you. So a couple of weeks of reviews of ongoing cricket, and then we will have our preview of the World Cup coming up. So do get your comments into the chat, into the social channels, or on the website, thetopwaterpodcast.com, if you want to give us your final thoughts and who might cause some spoilers during that World Cup, and we'll be sure to give a few shout outs during the preview show in 2 or 3 weeks time. But for now, it is good night and good bless from us all here in Auckland. We'll see you next week on the Top Water Podcast. See you later.